guys, happy Thursday, or as Jonathan says, happy Friday Eve.
Yeah.
Yeah. Today we're just going to do some brief review over the functions of behavior that we talked about on Monday. Then we're going to be taking a closer look at the components of a behavior reduction plan. And with the time we have left, we're going to start talking about the antecedent strategies that we would implement in preventing or deterring problem behavior from occurring. So let's get right into it. First question. During class, John begins throwing supplies on the floor. When this happens, the instructor tells John that he needs to take a 10-minute break in the hallway. What is the likely function at play here?
Escape.
I heard escape, so that's D. Does everybody agree with that? Yes? Okay.
Question one?
Yes, for question one. And top.
D.
Yes, D. Let's see. Yes, D. That's right. Yes, it is escape. It's almost as though he wanted that 10-minute break. How about that? Okay, whenever Sally sees a staff member talking to another client, she begins to clap her hands loudly and yells their name until the staff member turns to talk to her. Oh man, now even knows my hesitation. C. Attention. Yes. Great. When the vending machine is in sight, Kevin begins to grab at the pockets of the staff members. Staff usually give him $1 to use in the machine so he would stop grabbing.
Tangible.
A. Tangible. Yes. Very good.
Very good.
Yes, very nice. An individual often rocks back and forth and hums loudly when sitting alone in the patio area. This happens regardless whether staff are present or if they are asked to do a task.
D.
D.
Hearing the sensory, yes. And then last one. Whenever John finishes his workshop task, he stands up and starts knocking over chairs. Staff immediately rush over to him and spend several minutes redirecting him and talking about safety.
C.
C. Yes, it is attention.
That is Jonathan. Jonathan Oliva.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
No,
Okay.
Always. Like,
Alright, so it seems like we have a pretty good grasp on the functions. And the reason I started with the functions in mind because it's really the crux as to what entails a behavior reduction plan. So, what is a behavior reduction plan? You guys usually see it labeled as the BIP. So this is the document that explains the procedures and components to reducing a client's problem behavior. And the ultimate aim is so then we can decrease certain behaviors from occurring. Now, it's not just any behavior that we want to pick. It's usually ones that are not to their well-being, ones that lead to their own harm or the harm of others. So things such as aggression, self-injurious behavior, property destruction, all these are the likely candidates to problem behavior that we would intervene on. And I like this analogy of thinking of it as a roadmap because it gives us this consistent procedure that anybody should be able to pick up who is trained to follow. Last week, we talked about the dimensions of behavior analysis, and one of them being technological, which means you should be able to take a procedure and whoever can follow it should be able to do so consistently, just as anybody else who's trained on doing so. So that's a way we think about the behavior reduction plan. So let's take a look at some of the individual components. The first one being that of the target behavior that they were trying to intervene on. And in order for us to get a good sense to not just know what we're addressing, but how to track it, the behavior itself has to be described in terms that are objective and measurable. And this is something that I've really tried to improve and work upon, because something that I'm not too big on is using kind of these umbrella catch-all terms. I really want to get a little bit more specific, especially when the particular behavior has a certain form that is pretty distinguishable. So, for instance, you would not see operational definition or a behavior label include a term like anger or frustration, because that's more or less describing an internal state, something that we ourselves are not able to observe from a third person point of view. Instead, it would be physical aggression, with some of the forms of the behavior being described. So, forceful contact, leaving a bruise or red mark, things that we can see and can tell that this is the objective sign of behavior. Target behaviors. And oh, would you look at that? The functions of behavior. Again, just as we described last time, we want to be able to look at behavior through the lens of function, keeping that acronym SEAT in mind: sensory, escape, attention, tangibles. And you can see in this example here, we have more or less a good idea as to what the function of the behavior is. Here, the individual is engaging in escape because a demand was placed on him or a request was placed on him. And in order to reduce this escape behavior, we would then implement an alternative. And we spent a good deal of time talking about this last time, so enough on that. Then we also can get into the data collection methods. And on the tracking sheets is usually the first column in the behavioral tracking. And there's usually two common methods that we collect. So that would be with frequency. So every time the behavior occurs, we try to provide a clear onset and offset to when the behavior happens. So that way we can distinguish when one instance of behavior happens and perhaps when another one starts. And duration, just simply how long the behavior lasts. In both instances, when we're targeting problem behavior, we want to see those numbers decrease. So ideally, this individual would reduce to maybe an initial short-term goal to just simply 2 instances of SIB, and then a long-term goal of maintaining 0 instances for a 6-month period. And for duration, reducing it from 15 minutes to 10 to 5, etc. This is another component that we are very well familiar with by this point. The antecedents and consequences of what happens before the behavior. We can kind of think of this as what triggers it, and the consequences to what is maintaining it. As we saw in the earlier example, what was maintaining the escape was access to the hallway, access to a break. And part of the behavior intervention plan is to change either one of those components, either the antecedent or the consequence.
Okay.
So an example of this would be staff telling Michael attempts to transition from the lounge to the exercise. He drops on the floor, kind of plops down, refuses to move, and then they give him some more time on the tablet to calm down. And as it turns out, this reinforces the behavior. So the more often that they give him this opportunity to escape, the more likely he is to do it. Component 5 is the intervention strategies. So these would either include the proactive antecedent strategies or the replacement behavior. So you can think of these as the behavioral goals, the things we're trying to teach the client as an alternative to the problem behavior, so they're more likely to do the alternative and it's more appropriate and gets them what they want much more quicker and efficiently than the problem behavior. Yeah, and the proactive strategies are all based on antecedent manipulation. We'll get a chance today. We'll briefly describe some, and then we'll get into more of them tomorrow. But yeah, for those, just think of them as being proactive, changing the environment so it deters the problem behavior from occurring. Okay. And then consequences, procedures, or the crisis emergency procedures. So this is when problem behavior is moderate to severe. It can lead to the individual clients to not just harm themselves but others. And at these moments, this is not the opportunity to teach them the proper, uh, appropriate method of getting what they want. One of my favorite behavior analysts, his name is Dr. Hanley, and he describes the only state when you can teach a client or a learner is when they are happy, relaxed, and engaged. If they are none of those things, that is not the opportunity to teach them. And it's safe to say when somebody is escalated, the best thing to do is to ensure their safety along with everybody else's, and we're able to diffuse the situation. So that's, we have about one more. Ah, yes, the BIPs are living documents. They are dynamic. Just as the client grows and matures and goes through their own changes, so do the interventions that we have for their particular plans. So the most ideal circumstance is the client no longer having particular problem behaviors. So then we can change their behavior intervention plan to simply a behavior support plan. So then they can have other goals that we can work on without having that much of a concern for the problem behavior occurring. And of course, it's a collaborative approach. So whenever you guys provide me with feedback as regard to the particular targets that we have, particular goals, I am more than open to hearing about those. And you don't have to worry about me taking it the wrong way. No, if you just tell me, oh, Sal, this does not make sense, or can you please explain the rationale for that? Yeah, I want to listen and I want to take that in mind so then we can do what we can for the client. Because I understand how difficult it can be kind of balancing everything between building the rapport, maintaining the rapport with the clients, make sure they're well taken care of, and also implementing their goals alongside that. So your feedback and help is critical. Yeah, since I may be going to share this with my supervisor, I didn't want to include an exact replica of what we work on, but just as something that's pretty common, I think this has a pretty broad range as to most of the clients that we work with. So just a simple case study as to what the components would look like for an individual. So again, Johnny throws items from his desk whenever a room becomes too loud. Again, we could probably think of certain individuals where that this might apply to. So evidently, the function of the escape is escape. This has been demonstrated numerous times. Multiple individuals have reported this to be the case. And then with the intervention, we can include things such as a proactive approach, such as providing him the option of noise canceling headphones for him to listen to his music, for instance, and being able to provide him the option to go to a quiet area. And then for the data, we're tracking the frequency of the items thrown or the property destruction. Okay. Any questions before we move on? I think you guys have enough exposure to the behavior intervention plans throughout your time here to have a good sense of it, but it's always good to explicitly state each of the components. Okay. Question one. What is the primary goal of a behavior reduction plan?
B.
I love it when it's all in unison. It's perfect. Yes, it's a roadmap. That way we can all support the individual clients in the same exact manner. Which one of these is the most appropriate, measurable, and observable target behavior?
A.
Yes. Yes. It's very hard to tell from internally just if they are frustrated or if something else is going on. And typically, we don't include diagnosis in the behavior definition. If you're accounting every time Sally uses profanity, which data collection method are you using?
Frequency. Frequency.
Frequency, yeah. Each instance of the profanity is its own discrete
Not the
instance.
intensity.
Yeah, the other ones do not make sense. In the case study that we looked at earlier, Johnny requested to go to the quiet room instead of throwing his belongings. What is this an example of?
No.
Oh, I'm hearing.
Letter D. Replacement behavior.
Okay, I'm hearing A. I'm hearing D. Let's see who's right.
A.
Yes, it's the replacement behavior. So the target behavior is the property destruction, the thing we're interested in intervening on, whereas the replacement behavior, the thing we're trying to teach them to do instead, is making that request to go to the quiet room. Good. All right, this is the last one for the section. If behavior lasts 15 minutes, which measurement should be recorded?
C.
Yes,
Duration.
duration. None of the other ones will make all too much sense. Now, when we talk about data collection procedures, there are more options than frequency and duration, but I think for our intent purposes, those are the most suitable. Okay, great. I am going to throw a lot of more or less unfamiliar terms to you guys. It took me a while to understand some of these things, so I'm going to do my best to explain it in a very digestible manner. And April also gave me this great idea earlier to, if you guys are interested, I can make a cheat sheet with all of these terms for those who are interested in pursuing the RBT test outline, or the exam rather. But yeah, now we're going to talk about the antecedent interventions. And this is a particular class that isn't made explicitly said on the newer edition, but I think it's equally as important. So we're going to be talking about
Motivation.
antecedents based on what are referred to as motivating operations. Now, this is all about understanding the role of motivation in the context of a behavior plan. My previous supervisor, not the one I have now, but the one who did me dirty, uh, he one of the very first things he said to me was, Sal, if you don't understand the role of motivation when it comes to a treatment plan, you can never come up with anything effective. So what did he do? He made me read 6 of the seminal research articles talking about motivating operations. And I would say that's probably the best thing he's done for me, because now this is something that I can at least understand a lot better. So I'm hoping I can pass that on to you guys. But at any rate, what is a motivating operation? So this is an environmental event or a condition, something that temporarily changes the value of a reinforcer. Now it does 2 things in particular. A specific reinforcer, its value is either increased or decreased, and the behaviors that lead to acquiring that reinforcer are either increased or decreased. And I think at a more surface level, this can make sense a little bit. We don't typically want the same reinforcer all the time and delivered the same way. So I don't know about you guys, but in the morning, I find coffee to be incredibly reinforcing. I will work my butt off to work for coffee, but maybe around now, or maybe even a little bit later, around 4 o'clock, 5 p.m., I'm probably not going to value coffee all that much because it's going to keep me up at night. And I think the analogy with hunger and being full is very similar, where with food, you're going to value it a lot more when you're hungrier, and you're not going to value it as much if you're full. But we'll spend a little bit more on looking into that. So yeah, MO changes the value of a reinforcer and changes how often an individual engages in those behaviors that lead to the reinforcer. There are two MOs. There are what referred to, and I just want to say I don't think you need to know this explicitly for the RBT exam, but it is an important distinguishing factor to make because I would like to add these little components into the BIPs. Establishing operations, EOs, increase the value of a reinforcer. So you would want it more. With an abolishing operation, an AO, you want it less. So again, when you're hungry, you want food a whole lot more. And if you're full, you're not going to want it as much. Are you guys with me so far? Okay. So let's take a closer look at the establishing operation. So you can think of this as being in a state of deprivation. You are deprived of the thing you want. And again, there is a value altering effect. So the reinforcer becomes more valuable. You want it much more. And because you want it a lot more, you're going to engage in behaviors that lead to it much more frequently. Let's say you're hungry, so you might do a whole number of different things. You may go look as to what's inside the fridge. You may drive to a restaurant to get some takeout. You may go see if a friend wants to grab dinner. A whole number of different things that are increased because the value for food is a lot higher. And that is called, the behavior altering is called an evocative effect, but again, you guys don't necessarily need to know that for the exam. So this is a good example of it. Let's say it's a hot day outside and our friend David has been working at the garden for 2 hours without having a single drink. Oh man, I wonder how enticing a cold cup of water would be for him.
Even valuable. Huh?
Incredibly valuable. Yeah, he would do anything for it. That's right. So now, because water is so valuable, he's going to do a lot more water-seeking behaviors to get it. He's going to look for a water fountain. He's going to go ask someone who can give him water. And he'll do all sorts of things to get water because it's so valuable right now. So we would say here, David is in a state of water deprivation. He is deprived of water and wants it. On the other side, we looking at abolishing operations, AOs. This, you can think of being satiated. I am good. I don't want that thing. These two primarily effects, it decreases the value of the reinforcer, and it also has what is referred to as an appetitive effect, which means you don't do the behaviors that lead to it. Let's say you just had a nice meal, so you're full, and somebody brings another plate of food for you. You're not going to probably touch it. It is no longer valuable, and you're probably not going to go out and search for the food. You're not going to go into the fridge and look to see what's there. You're not going to call a friend to see if they want to grab dinner or go to a restaurant because you're good. The food is no longer valuable. Yeah, this is a similar example to the one I just gave. So you have a client. Her name is Linda. She just had a large lunch. So now, if she is motivated by food, we can say that she is quote unquote food driven. Now all of a sudden, food doesn't work as a reinforcer. So now we would have to come up with other things for her, but more on that in a moment. Okay, before we move on, uh, any questions regarding motivating operations? So to summarize, motivating operations is just the term for both the ones that increase the value
and
of a
decrease
reinforcer
abolish.
and the ones that decrease it. MOs, and then you have the establishing operation and the abolishing operation. EO and AO. MO. But none of this really matters if we're not being able to apply it in our current setting. So let's take a look at some of the ways understanding motivating operations, just the role of human motivation comes into play when we're interacting with the client on a daily basis. So, first of all, yeah, it could really lead to the prevention of these power struggles we might find ourselves in. When a client, let's say, doesn't want to do something, we shouldn't be so quick to label it as defiance or refusal or non cooperation. Rather, maybe they're in a satiated state for that thing. As with the example earlier, the fact that Linda had a full meal means that food is no longer going to be a reinforcer for her. And same thing if an individual has rested for a good bit and let's say is ready to work, offering them a break is not that valuable anymore. So they're not going to engage in the behaviors that lead to a break. Yeah. MOs can also explain why a client may be readily available to do one thing one day and completely refuse to do it the next. We can look at factors such as lack of sleep or missing breakfast as these setting events or these motivating factors that go into making certain escape behaviors more valuable. In those circumstances, when we know that, oh, hey, just a heads up, so and so didn't sleep that well last night, or they didn't eat that well in the morning, we can then adjust the amount of demands we place on them. Just so then, again, you don't lead to the power struggle. We're able to meet them at where they're at. And for the days that they're good, then we can proceed as usual. And I would say this is probably one of the most important reasons that it increases the value of reinforcement. If a client wants something more and more, they're probably going to have to work harder and harder for it. The example that comes really to mind is Justin. When he wants a DVD, he really wants it. So he would do things that he typically doesn't want to do without that high motivating operation in place, such as pretty much anything that he has to do to sit down and do on the table.
Addiction.
All right, so how can we actually apply MOs in our daily interactions with the clients and following some of the goals in the ISP and the BIP? One of which would be to capturing the kind of contrive or create this increased motivation in a particular behavior. So, for instance, so this is something that I like to do all the time too. We get, let's say it's the day to do arts and crafts, and a client receives pretty much all the supplies except for one key element in completing the arts and crafts. they're most likely going to want to request it. If there's anything to request, it's going to be that thing. So then they can complete their activity.
Hmm.
Yes, because now they're in a state of deprivation for that item, and they really want it. So then they can complete the activity. An example here is a
How about activity?
very color pencil, but it could be a whole number of different things. Then our second application would be to reduce the challenging or problem behavior by satiating need for it. So, for instance, if there is a client who does a lot of attention-seeking behaviors, some that may be more appropriate than others, we can bombard them with the intention for a short little period of time, so then they become satiated, and they will no longer, at least for a brief period, need to do all sorts of uh, possibly inappropriate things to get the attention because they've already received and have been satiated with the interaction. And I'm starting to include that in some of the BIPs. We're going to talk about non-contingent reinforcement tomorrow, and that is a strategy that is built on that idea. We identify the function of behavior, so then we can provide reinforcement for it without them needing to engage in the problem behavior. And it kind of breaks that contingency, and we can spend more time teaching the appropriate responses. I think I have one more here. Yes. Again, when we're looking at some of the motivating factors to do one particular response over another, we can consider factors just as the antecedent conditions that we described earlier. A long transportation ride, a noisy environment, could all be things that can influence an individual to engage in a certain way, maybe a little bit more prevalent problem behavior. So to offset that, you can provide a way for them to get the necessary satiation they need in order to move on or go about their day. So, for instance, you could probably imagine how a 45-minute ride could, in a more noisy environment, could lead to an individual wanting some peace and quiet for a bit. And being able to offer that before transitioning may be crucial in avoiding any sorts of refusal behaviors from occurring. Yeah, because is it Kathy who is all the way in Roseville? Yeah. So you can probably imagine somebody like Kathy who may be in a bit of a bind in a very long car ride may benefit for a little peace and quiet before being provided some instructions and commands. Yeah, and I included this in the handouts too. Just just a very brief table kind of describing some of the motivating operations that could be at play when we're interacting with the clients. So, for instance, if the client is appeared bored, they may do some things for attention or just to satiate their boredom. This will be the opportunity to introduce a task for them. Yeah, the client appears to be pacing or is agitated, offering a break because there is an increased desire for an escape or quiet response. And yeah, if they ignore the reinforcers, the typical ones, that they might already be satiated with those things. There's an AO in place, so that would mean we have to offer something else. Again, the example of food, somebody already has had their fair share, they're probably not going to want to go out and work for more food. So I hope that table can be a bit helpful for you guys. And then to summarize, motivating operations are temporary. you can only be full for so long. You can only be so hungry for so long, and along with thinking functionally, we can start thinking when a client acts a certain way, what could be some of the MOs in place that may have them act a certain way as opposed to how they usually are. We think, okay, if there is this instance of challenging behavior, there is probably a state of deprivation that the client is in. Again, Justin today, he saw all, all clients with the soda in hand, which reminded him of his soda deprivation. So he began doing things in order to seek and request soda. So recognizing that upon seeing soda may have increased the value of it, led him to engage in more soda-seeking behaviors. Unfortunately for Justin, it's a form of palm behavior and getting very loud and disruptive. But those things are really helpful to keep in mind when we are able to intervene. So, for instance, what I did earlier with Justin is I just had him come on a walk with me, seeing if I could avoid those individuals with soda in hand. And sure enough, everywhere we went, we turned the corner and there was somebody holding a soda bottle, soda cup. But then yeah, we just listened to music together and kind of reminded him of the contingency at play that he has with the care home to have that he gets soda at Saturday, and plus he had it yesterday too. So kind of reminding him of that, I think did help in deterring him.
Yes.
Yes, Willie.
How about this? Just like what you said about Justin.
Mm-hmm.
He's deprived of soda.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do? Provide him or what?
No, because if we provide the soda, that's gonna open Pandora's box, just as it did last week, and it's gonna lead to all sorts of other things. Because if you give him the soda, funny enough, it's gonna increase the value of the soda more.
Okay. So then, how are we going to make that behavior
Mm-hmm.
decreases, or what?
Yes.
It's gonna be escalate if we don't give.
Yeah, yeah. So what we've been doing is we try to redirect it to something else that is equally desirable for him. So, for instance, the DVDs, he gets to pick, or at least we can try to decipher what DVD he wants, and if he follows through with the completion of certain tasks, he gets access to the DVD that he asked for. And that has been, I would say, somewhat effective in helping him.
So you must establish operation then. We must establish operation like an operation.
Yeah.
It's an EO.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly right. It's an EO.
Okay.
The EO for soda has increased. The value for soda has increased for him. But just because that EO is in place doesn't mean we can't offer a different EO. The presence of a DVD, especially one he got to pick out, increases the value for that DVD.
Okay.
So now we have some
So at the same time, you abolish the AO for the soda.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because he has this thing he really likes now, all of a sudden he can forget about the soda. So yes, that's exactly right. It is an AO for soda. The DVD is an AO for soda.
All right.
Good. No, I'm glad. So I'll put that together. I think that was a slide. Any other questions, comments in regards to the clients and maybe some of the motivating operations in place for them on a daily basis? How was this, guys? To be honest, did it make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad. Yeah, because like I said, it took me so long to figure this stuff out. I had an entire week to try to figure it out for one of my classes, and yeah, the fact that we just had an hour to do it made me a little skeptical. I was able to get it done. But yeah, just the most important thing is to recognize the role of motivation that comes with what the clients may want, what they need, Yeah, and that's all. We can attach these fancy terms to them, but ultimately, I think we can recognize when somebody really wants something, they will do a lot of things to get it. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay, well, thank you guys. We'll pick this back up tomorrow.
Okay.